lot of times we talk about what took down the Soviet Union, what took down the USSR. You might say the people, you might say Rocky, but this film posits something completely different.
It gives like a certain avenue, one of the many avenues for the crumbling of communism. As the spark has already been there, and this is kind of a pushover.
Exactly, yeah. The walls begin to fall for 4 simple blocks. Today, we're talking Tetris. Hey everybody, welcome back to the show. I'm one of your hosts, Kyle Goethe from GoatFilmReviews.com.
Hi everybody, I'm Nick from the St. Paul Filmcast. Thanks for finding us, thanks for watching, and for our loyal fans, thank you for continuing to support the show. You can follow the show on Twitter and on Instagram. Yep, we have a Patreon. Check that out for some great deals and an opportunity to tell us what movies we could do in the future, just like this episode.
Yeah.
Both Kyle and I are members of the Minnesota Film Critics Alliance. Check out that webpage for critics' reviews as well as ours. And you could do us a solid. A like and subscribe. A simple, easy step for you, but it makes a great deal of importance for us, just like Tetris.
Yeah, exactly. And once again, thank you, Tyler Paul, for suggesting this episode.
Yeah.
Gave us an excuse to go out and see a film I think both of us were interested in seeing.
Yeah.
All right, so when game developer Hank Rogers discovers a new game called Tetris, he can't get it out of his mind. He elects to get the rights to release the game somewhere, anywhere, but he also has to compete with a lying license dealer, a father and son media tycoon, and the KGB.
So a little bit of background. When did you get introduced to Tetris? Because you were born after kind of the thing.
Well, I had a Game Boy.
Okay.
I was kind of like a family Game Boy shared between the
Right.
3 brothers, but there was a power outage at our home, and I think the power was out for about a week in our small town during the winter.
Okay.
And there was no ability to go outside. There wasn't nothing to do. We went through all of our Where's Waldo books, and finally my brother took out the Game Boy, and we split up, and we played a game of Tetris competitive to see who get the highest score. I don't think I did very good the first time around, but I've been playing Tetris since then. I have a version of it for my 3DS. I have a version of it for my Switch, for my GameCube. There have been Tetrises since the beginning of time, perhaps.
So I was a kid throughout the entire 80s, from age 3 to 13. And when you're younger kids, you're so adapted to the Rubik's Cube kind of a thing. That was the gimmick. The Rubik's Cube was a popular thing in like mid-80s. When this came out and introduced like an 89, 90 like Game Boy, it almost like a portable, it was that sold like, oh, you can have Nintendo in your pocket and you can take it everywhere you go.
Oh, yeah.
And that's kind of where it was sold. But then, who wants to play Mario? We've already played Mario in a bit. Why would you want to go smaller? And then everyone like, why would that? But then somebody's like, well, there's another game on this. It's called Tetris. And I don't think anybody played Mario unless you were just bored and had enough of Tetris and got mad at it. But then that was the introduction because there was like, you could see the smaller screen is a functional better than seen on a big screen.
And I think Tetris worked better in the translation to handheld than I think Mario did. I've played Super Mario Land, which was the iteration of the franchise that was for the Game Boy. I played the first couple of those. And I never felt like they really worked that well. Like if you gave me a choice between any of the Super Mario Lands or literally any other Mario game, I would never pick the Super Mario Land games because they didn't translate well. There were too much smallness.
Right.
You couldn't do as much. I mean, the one game was literally called 6 Golden Coins because you need to find 6. That's how much the game had, you know. So I really think Tetris translated better than most other games. And it's it's one of the games I think kept that system literally going from the Game Boy all the way to the DS to the 3DS. Now that system has actually essentially died off because the Switch is doing both.
So it has one of those ingredients and balances for game strategic formula where you have strategy meets chance, pretty much equal, and a little bit of luck. You always have those 3 integrants for any kind of game.
Yeah.
That strategic, chance, and a little bit of luck makes, if you balance those out in a mathematical formula, it's a perfect game. And this is it. Because this is not only strategy, but I need that line square. I got it!
Yeah. Yeah, and watching the film was the first time I ever really thought about the tet in Tetris being 4. I never even really thought about the fact that all the shapes were 4 blocks.
Variations of 4
blocks.
Yeah,
I'd never put it together really in my head. It wasn't something I thought of. I was just trying to get the game.
And that is so Russian.
Yeah.
Variations, simplistic, but variations of the simplistic.
Exactly, yeah. And so the film, I think originally when the idea started floating around, there was actually an initial idea to make a Tetris movie like set in the world of the game where people were trying to were actually living about it.
Kind of like the Emoji Movie.
Yeah, where like it was set in the world of Tetris. And I mean, names were bandied around like Ridley Scott was almost attached to it for a while. They tried to get him. Like to this Tetris movie.
Kinda like
and I
mixed-
never really would have figured out what that would have been as a movie.
I'm just thinking I've never heard of it before, but I'm thinking kind of like Emoji Muji meets Tron, something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I can't really understand how you would make anything like that into a conceivable. I mean, we live in a world where the Lego movie is a fantastic movie based literally on a
Legos.
piece of 4-block toy. So anything can happen. Anything can work as a movie. I just don't understand how that one was. So years passed, and then eventually the idea came about to make a movie about the making of the game itself instead of the game. So,
If you haven't really noticed, I'm sure you did. Netflix has a documentary on the making of video games, the authentic documentation how Tetris got out.
yeah.
And it's kind of fascinating documentary. And this is not a documentary. This is 9% true.
Yeah, I'm referring to movies like this because we've actually had 3 of them this year. There was Air, which was about the making of the Air Jordan. There was Blackberry, about the making of Blackberry. And there was this film about the making of Tetris. I've kind of solidified these as brandographies. Whereas that we're talking about like the actual creation of an item for them. I mean, we had something, 10, 12 years ago, The Social Network. That was kind of a brandography in a lot of ways too, in that it was about the making of an item. What's so crazy about it is I don't really want a ton of these movies, but it seemed like, having seen Air last month, I saw Blackberry last week, I was like, damn it, they're good. Like, so it's like, I'm kind of wrestling with the idea, I don't want to have like 30 of these a year.
But you understand
they do turn
how
out pretty good.
I mean, we're going to review movies once something of like these kind of genres make money and get popular. You're going to kick out a bunch of other ones.
Yeah,
Just
and
like
that's kind of what
superhero
came
movies
about with it, was that Air, of course, being an Amazon Prime film means that it's going to make whatever money it's going to make in theaters. Blackberry was an IFC original, so it was a really low-budgeted movie. I'm not sure that's going to make much of an impact outside of maybe the Oscar season. And then you have Tetris, which was picked up by Apple, who has been,
right?
Yeah.
Film?
They picked up the rights to this movie so that they could release it. And what's so interesting about it is that Apple has decided they're going to give $1 billion a year to theatrically released movies towards making them, releasing them, and putting them on there, which I do appreciate. This one was not theatrically released. It did premiere at South by Southwest, though.
Oh, it did premiere at South by Southwest, which is kind of a catch-all. If you get good reviews there, then that leads
South by
to it.
Southwest seems to do very well for genre stuff, and I wouldn't exactly call this genre, but it's about genre.
Especially when it's very much for those techie kids down there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Who like techie kids. So the gimmick was in the 80s something a little more, not like shoot 'em up games that we got, but this was strategic, much like chess, and was very refreshing. I wouldn't say it's like new, but we got so bombarded with arcade games of just single action adventure oriented, but this was completely different. This is strategic oriented. And there's one thing, you can't cheat. It's your ability, right?
Yeah. And you can only hide your flaws for so long before they build
Catch
up on
up to you. And that's the gimmick is Tetris, eventually you're going to lose. Yeah. You're never going to win it outright.
Yeah, the game is made for marathon death, essentially. And that's, what Hank Rogers, Taron Egerton's character in the film actually says, too, is that if you want to make a game that sells to kids, you sell them with Mario. If you want to make a game that sells to everyone, you sell Tetris. And that's true. My parents never played a traditional 2D side-scroller Mario game. Yeah. My parents both played Tetris at one point, at least once.
So, with the making of the film, it looks like with Apple TV, and then Tetris, they get Taron Egerton.
Yep.
I think it's the right cast.
The producers, of course, Matthew Vaughn, who had basically created Taron Egerton as an actor. He got him in both of his Kingsman movies. And then also produced Rocket Man and Eddie the Eagle. Just basically creating this subgenre basically of Taron Egerton starring films that I think are usually quite wonderful.
Maybe he gets a cut of his earnings.
Maybe, yeah. So it seems
Vaughn
like
gets a cut. Yeah.
It seems like Vaughn has kind of really shepherded Taron Egerton because he hasn't had a lot of success outside of Vaughn films. He did that Robin Hood film. He was in the Sing movie and the sequel. I never really watched those. They didn't look very good. So, Egerton's not really had a lot of great success outside of Vaughn, but they are a really great working together partnership. And he plays, of course, Hank Rogers, the man who gets the rights here.
If I remember right, the director is the same director with James McAvoy with The Filth.
Yes, John S. Baird, who I had not seen Filth, but I'd seen Stan and Ollie, his biopic about Laurel and Hardy, which I thought was quite wonderful. So
yeah, that movie was a solid film. I would say great film, kind of, but it was a solid well done,
well-constructed movie that it's not one that I felt the need to go back to.
Right.
But when I think back on it, I think very fondly. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it was structured very well, which we'll get to our review of Tetris movie.
Yeah.
So,
you also have Rick Yoon, who kind of opens up the film. He, of course, was in like The Man with the Iron Fist, The Fast and the Furious. He played
behind the desk.
Yeah. I was really hoping he'd have more of a presence in the film because I really like Rick Yoon, and I feel like he's been kind of
well, that's a good start of the
sidelined.
movie. I like that how you do your exposition dump early.
Yeah. The exposition dump is done, I get, with two very charismatic actors.
Right.
And so they're having a lot of fun. If it had just been that scene as a short film, would have been very, very enjoyable all of its own.
They offer me X amount of dollars. Well, hey, let's celebrate. I turned it down.
I turned it down. Exactly. Like, it's one of those classic kind of like stories of almost, we've talked about it before, failing upwards almost, where it seems like he has no idea what he's doing, but there's that undercurrent of he understands it because he is a game developer, which I really appreciate.
I don't know, the guy that Taron's playing.
Yeah, Hank Rogers, yeah.
He could fit very well into a Mel Brooks movie.
Yeah, I could see that.
Yeah.
I could see Taron Egerton fitting well in
And
a Mel Brooks movie as well.
The actor too.
We also have Toby Jones, who plays Robert Stein. He's the guy who's developing the game license, or buying the game licenses from Russia, competing with him. A lot of our viewers might know him from the MCU. He was in the Captain America films.
America show.
I always know him as the voice of Dobby the house elf from the Harry Potter films as well. Toby Jones is one of those guys, when you get him in a film, it only adds to the film. He's never the lead outside of, I think, a Truman Capote.
He's one of those people that if I see him, it codifies. It's all right.
Yeah.
Toby Jones is in the movie. Now we got a movie.
Yeah, I saw one shot of him in the Indiana Jones 5 trailer, and I was like, okay, yeah, you've got me now.
All right, we got a movie.
Yeah, and so the film also features Roger Allam as Robert Maxwell. He's the father of the father-son media mogul team.
Is he wearing a suit?
He's got to be wearing some sort of like facial device, because I know Roger Allam. He was in a couple episodes of Game of Thrones. He's also in one of my favorite movies of all time, Speed Racer, as the villain in that film as well.
Yeah.
Looks nothing like he does in this
No,
movie.
he looks like he's in a Dick Tracy movie.
Yeah. So I'm not sure whose choice that was. It's a little silly, but at the same time,
So is this movie.
yeah, at the same time, Roger Allam's not a household name, so I don't know that it would have taken many people out. So, yeah.
All right, perfect. So up next is our review of our Patreon selection of Tetris. I just want to emphasize, this is not a documentary. If you want a documentary, that's why I brought up on Netflix. There's a great documentary about the how Tetris got into circulation around the world.
Yeah.
This is completely a film. I love that embrace.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't want to see like the 100% true story in this movie.
No.
Because you're right. I think that is the perfect delineation between what a documentary should be and what a feature film should be. Yeah. Feature film's point is not to give you 100% accuracy. It's to give you an entertaining, enthralling, exciting film that you connect with. And I think that's what this movie did at several times where I was thinking, okay, this obviously couldn't have actually happened, but I'm still excited, I'm still enticed, I'm still entertained.
So the first half of the movie is very, almost like an Alfred Hitchcock movie. It's the enticement, the gimmick. I want to achieve something that's going to, it's the MacGuffin, as Hitchcock would say. I want to get the rights. I'm going to sell it to the world as somebody who's been a failed person. Taron he invented a game that's similar, but it's not taking off, and he realizes this one's far more better and far more exceeding.
He's willing to admit his faults, too, and I love that he even references, I think it's called Tetris brain, which is the idea that when you spend so much time looking at something, it actually invades your dreams a little bit, and that's what he actually did, was he was seeing those blocks in his
who
mind.
doesn't think Tetris when you're backpacking your car, you know, for a trip?
It's one of the sad things about the loss of the handheld Nintendo system is that the Tetris itself is not preloaded on it anymore, you know?
Yeah, I had to load up my truck for Comic-Con. I had to figure out, okay, I did some Tetris with them. I got it. Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So the film is actually, I think it's a little bit longer than it feels. Is it a little bit, or is it?
Yeah.
It feel, or am I saying it wrong? Is it longer than what it really is? It feels a little bit longer than what it is.
The crazy thing is, so the first hour of the film I thought flew by really quickly.
Right.
I was like, oh, we're only 20 minutes in, right? And then, like, all of
Right.
a
I'm
sudden
already
we're
putting in
there.
like my top 10 of the mid-year.
Yeah, and then the second half of the film, not a poor pacing, but just less of a forward thrust. You know what I mean? Like, I'd gotten up to use the restroom, I came back, and then I noticed that second hour felt longer. It felt kind of like an hour and a half.
I know what they're doing with the second act. They're trying to almost like, I don't want to reference Alfred Hitchcock, but you throw a little bit of red herrings in the second act to keep the intense suspense going of when he's going to get caught. Almost. But it's played so stale that I never felt like he was ever threatened.
Yeah, the thing about it is it's kind of an espionage film mixed with a business film. And so we have something that I tend to coin in business movies. It's called the briefcase shuffle, which is just that everybody is moving around the game board trying to make offers and make deals and do that kind of stuff. If there's a great movie
That's
about...
a good analogy. I want to use it.
Briefcase shuffling that's called Draft Day with Kevin Costner. It's all about the NFL draft as opposed to actually being about the NFL. It's all about people talking on phones about the NFL. I think it's a great movie.
Oh, yeah, they're trading
players and picks, yeah.
Picks.
And I think that's one of those things where that movie is all about people talking on phones, and it's enthralling, it's enticing. There are moments of that in this film, not all of them, but there are moments of it where the idea of these two people on the phone is enticing, it's exhilarating, and I think sometimes it's almost done better than a movie that I think is wholly superior in Air, the new Ben Affleck film that came out this year.
Air. It's funny that we got a movie called Air, and then we have another movie just plain called Plane.
That's true.
Yeah. So I was told, I agree with you 100%. I was totally enthralled with the first act. I like where it's going. The second act just felt stationed, almost like Tetris.
Yeah.
Felt like we're stagnant. We're not making any progress here.
Yeah.
We're not moving forward. And then the third act kind of, the anxiety topples up to him because the end result, nobody really wins out.
Yeah, I think there's a little bit to be said in that like hour 10-minute mark to about the hour 40-minute mark where I think the film stalls out a little bit. The pieces aren't coming together, not to make a Tetris thing, but pieces aren't coming together the way that they should. And then it also, leading up until that final confrontation where they have to decide, are we getting the rights or are we not? Then it started to kick back into speed, and I think like the finale scene, obviously the chase sequence, I've had a lot of fun with it. I thought that it was really well designed. The idea of every time the cars hit something, they turn into blocks and then come back together. Like the style of the movie.
That little snippet of it. Maybe this is a video game that we're watching.
Yeah, I really loved whenever they would kind of do a setup shot for a location. It would be blocks, and then it would unblock itself, introducing characters with their 8-bit versions. Instead of having chapter titles, doing level titles. I'm a big proponent of chapter titles in movies. And so having the level titles I thought was really funny and kind of...
It was kind of interesting. Tarantino would have done it if he did this movie.
Yeah, well, I kept thinking about a movie like Eddie the Eagle, which was also produced by Matthew Vaughn, starring Taron Egerton, which is kind of one of those films where it's a little over the top. It's a little goofier than normal. It's more high-end. But it's also got that really unique style to it where the film feels like it's auteuristic. It feels like it is part of something that's bigger than itself.
And when you're trying to balance out, it's video archaic, but it's also trying to be a James Bond, not really a James Bond, more like Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, kind of a dreary spy espionage movie. Mm-hmm. That when you combine two genres, I think you have to overlay a little bit. Are you really going to do a really spy? You can't have equal. Yeah. Which is interesting. And I think it tries to level out, like we're both this and this. And I really want one of them to get ahead. Yeah. The silliness or the espionage one.
Yeah. I think that's been said about, films. The idea is that it's so crazy but it actually happened is kind of been prevalent in a couple of recent films. I always go back to Black Klansman, the Spike Lee film, that really played up the how the hell did this actually happen situation.
Really played it up.
And there's a couple moments in that film that are, of course, like Hollywoodized to make the movie seem a little bit more like over the top and grand. That's what this one is doing as well. It's not doing it as well. Right. And I almost wish that maybe they had set the audience up at the beginning of the film that says, based on a true story, mostly, or something like that. Really set you up as like, we are going to go a bit over the top, but we're letting you know now.
Yeah, I saw a lot of very strong similarities to what we reviewed before, Pez Outlaw.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. The problem, I could not get Pez Outlaw. Maybe it's because our patron had selected both of these films. I saw a lot of similarities.
We should do a double feature of Tetris and Pez Outlaw.
Yeah, exactly. But maybe that was part of it, or maybe it was just that the two films have that kind of 80s, 90s flair to them as well. Yeah. They're about going into Russia to get something that you're not supposed to have.
Especially when you that timeline, you're kind of stuck with the aesthetic of Russia.
And they're both business films that think they're spy films.
Right. Yes. But the overall theme of it is kind of saying that Tetris is kind of the beginning cracks of the structure of communism in Russia. Even though a lot of it's already been starting, it's another one of those cracks to make the whole system collapse, because it did in 2 years later.
And I always love stories like that are about the idea that even the villains of the story know that they're going to lose. They know that they're losing, and so now they're all infighting amongst themselves. And you have that with the one agent who's making side deals with Roger Allam's character to get more money of his own, because he knows that it's going to fall, but at least I'll have some collection by then. And
he's smart enough to realize I need to get a little ahead in the game.
Yep.
But he's too dumb to realize that maybe he should not be.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of villain on villain backstabbing, and I really think that is one element that works very well in the film.
But the nice element is all the people get their comeuppings.
Yeah, and it's maybe a little Holly too.
Not really comeuppings, but they get they get the punch in the nose.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I love when at the end they replay the idea of like these blocks being built on the game and how Tetris is exploding as a game, and then you also have the blocks being broken down on the various walls and the things like that. It's a really nice juxtaposition of one wall goes up, one wall comes down, that I found pretty enticing. One of the other elements that I think is amazing in the movie, and unfortunately I don't think it would be high enough level to be an Oscar consideration, but I love the score. This is done by Lorne Balfe, who does a lot of animated films. He did the Lego Batman movie Megamind. What I noticed about 10-15 minutes in was he was taking the Tetris song,
the 8-bit.
Yeah, and he was kind of Stranger Thingsing it. He was giving it that synth vibe and that like something serious is happening here. But during some of the more action-packed sequences, you hear the da 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 da, and like you hear it playing out in this more serious tone. It felt very spy movie-ish. He got the assignment really well here.
Yeah, for my little bit minus, a little too much dialogue.
Yeah,
little more too much talk about contracts and negotiations. Even though that's interesting, a little too much of it that I think would translate well to a book, maybe, but it gets a little more talky heavy for me.
I wasn't bothered so much with the idea of the dialogue and just how some of the phone conversations and dialogue moments were shot.
Okay.
Cinematography was done by Alwyn Kuchner, who did a movie I really love called Sunshine, a great sci-fi film, as well as he did another political thriller called The Mauritanian that I also criticized for the shooting of dialogue scenes. Again, go back to that film Draft Day. All the characters on the phones are moving around in front of each other. Things are always happening. Go to Roger Allam's other movie in Speed Racer. All the characters are interacting, but they're moving throughout the space on the screen. This film, they're a little bit more stagnant when they're on the screen talking, and I think that's where you lose the excitement of those conversations because there's a lot of cool things happening in those moments.
I really, really wanted to love this movie, and I just kind of have I'm neutral. Not really disdain for it, not really I'm just kind of there. And I think that's probably what the audience you're going to get, because you're not going to watch this movie unless you're a fan of video games or you just love movies. I don't know who else will be interested in something like that.
It's a hard movie to sell. I'm thankful it ended up on a streaming service. I wish it had a theatrical run first, but I'm thankful it ended up somewhere where people will come across it.
Yeah.
And it does seem to fit with the Apple Plus, which is kind of more of a higher brow kind of filmmaking, and I do think this is a higher brow kind of filmmaking about something that's nostalgic.
But it does codify for me that Tyrion is a lead actor.
Yeah, I think I honestly, no jokes. I think he should have won for Rocket Man back in 2019. I think it's insane that
he won a Golden Globe.
But he should have walked away with he didn't get nominated for Rocket Man even. And I think that's an absolutely criminal feat. I think he's great in this movie.
Yeah.
I think this is an above average film while not reaching the heights of what it could have been.
He just needs the right material to really just launch him in the stratosphere.
Yeah, because I thought John Baird's film Stan and Ollie felt like a Laurel and Hardy film. Whereas this one, I don't think it fully commits to the spy or the business elements like you.
And I really wanted to pick one or the other. You know, Ghostbusters is a comedy with a little bit of horror.
Yeah. And I would have liked if this film had leaped up into the spy action. And again, really embrace the fact that this isn't 100% true. But, like, it's...
heighten up a little more the anxiety. Is my phone being tapped? Can I trust the translator or not? Yeah,
because there's a couple of moments where he arrives in a location and they're like, we're gonna kill you if you come back here. And he comes back, and we don't really feel his fear as much. And again, I think that comes down to the shot list, because I feel like Egerton looks nervous, but I feel like the film is kind of pulled back from him at those moments. And
I really wanted, pull one and lead. So overall, I'm kind of neutral on it. I'm kind of stagnant. I'm like Tetris. I never get ahead and never get behind.
It was a movie that it was just outside of the reach of my top 10 of the year so far.
Yeah.
Because I've seen 10 truly great movies, and this one just barely couldn't make that list. But I do recommend the film. If you have Apple Plus, they don't do a lot of selling on what's on their service. So if you have it and you're looking for something to watch, I do recommend Tetris. I think it was a good movie. It is not going to win Best Picture like Coda did, but I do think it's a good movie nonetheless.
Yeah. So, that's it for us. What do you got to add? Anything else to add?
No, just let us know what you thought of Tetris.
Yes, please do. Put a comment. We love it.
One thing I'd like to ask too, if you have any other films other than Blackberry Air, Tetris, or Social Network, brandographies, let me know what your favorite brandographies are, because I'm trying to think of others. I know there are others out there about movies about brands. Give us your favorite one.
I'm learning about this whole genre of films, is
It's
brandography.
a stupid genre,
Yeah.
but they keep making good movies, so who am I to stop them? Let us know your thoughts on Tetris down below, and thank you guys for joining us, and thank you once again to Tyler for picking this movie for us. If you want to be like Tyler, join the Patreon down in the description. Thank you guys for joining us. You can find my film reviews over at goatfilmreviews.com.
Hey, check out Tyler Prohl on TikTok as well as Instagram, as well as you can see him other local Minnesota comic conventions
He's
as
got
well.
TikTok. I got to join TikTok then.
Yeah. So, thank you for watching.